So welcome, listeners, to Debra and Peter are doing a podcast with me, Deborah Alcott-Tyler, and my chum, Peter Wanless. How are you, Peter? What have you been up to?
I'm well, thank you, Deborah. Like everyone, nearly everyone. I'm caught up in the excitement of the England men's football team's march towards glory. We're rather awkwardly recording this before they play their big game against Argentina, and I think it will come out shortly after the game has taken place. So yeah, there's much excitement about the football, and then also the cricket. So I think it's only a couple of weeks ago that I was kind of bemoaning the poor run of form that Somerset were going through in the 20 over competition. That if you play 12 games, and then there's a sort of knockout stage, and this is the competition which we just keep winning. But of our first 8 games, we only won 3. So I had reconciled myself to it being a year of transition. We'd had injuries and all this sort of stuff. And I'd spoken to our coach and kind of given him an opportunity to reply to me that, yes, it is, we're doing the best we can. But he was absolutely having none of it. And with 4 games to play, he was determined and believed in the players. Now, you might say that that's the role of a coach, to big everything up, but at the same time, if you're talking to someone in management, you might also manage expectations and take the opportunity to agree with me that, we might not get as far as we should. But he was having none of it, and he sets and expects high standards, and the team have absolutely delivered. They won all their last 4 games, and now we find ourselves having this great big knockout game against Yorkshire at Leeds. They've changed the time to 4:30 start so that the players can play the game, and anyone who happens to be able to drop everything and be in Leeds at 4:30 on Wednesday can watch Yorkshire against Somerset and then go straight on to watch England against Argentina. So it's a fantastic day of sport, which by the time this comes out will either have been a wonderful day of great celebration and memory, or truly dreadful. So there we are. That's my kind of sporting context.
I'm sort of like, as we've said before, kind of trying to be interested, because most of my staff are keen football supporters, but not really. With the Mexico game, my partner stayed up to watch it. I was like, I'll go to bed. I really don't care that much. When I got up in the morning and switched the TV on, it was on BBC Two, and they were replaying the match, and I tuned in just as it was 2-1 up to Norway. So I thought, well, that's that.
To Mexico game. Or Norway?
No, Norway,
Mexico.
Norway. I meant Norway game, sorry, not Mexico.
Okay, Norway, yeah.
Yeah, 2 up to Norway. And I was like, well, there's no point. And then I was just about to turn over, and then I suddenly realised that actually the goal was being contested, because Erling Haaland, is that his name?
Yes.
Did that push on whichever player it was. So then I sort of watched a bit to the end, but I just find it all too stressful.
Yeah, you said that last time.
Yeah,
life is too stressful. Don't put yourself through it if you're not enjoying
it. Exactly. And good luck for Somerset tomorrow, Peter.
Yes, well, fingers crossed, and then if we win, then it's a quick turnaround again, and another finals day in Birmingham, which I will go to on Saturday, and that will be the 6th finals day in a row, which is extraordinary stuff and unprecedented, I think, in the history of Somerset presidents. So I will take great credit for that. Despite being responsible for absolutely nothing, and move around in ceremonial splendor on Saturday. But that's enough sport. We keep saying this is not a sporting podcast. I mean, the other thing which has hit me quite hard, but not as hard as very many people, I'm sure, was this kind of shocking news of Ann Widdecombe's apparent murder. So I did put something on LinkedIn about Ann Widdecombe, because she was a really significant minister when I ran Michael Portillo's private office back in the 1990s. She was our Minister of State, and she was a really, really hardworking opinionated, clearly not everyone's cup of tea, minister. But I've heard her described, there's this thing about, are you a signpost or a weather vane? And she was absolutely a signpost. A bit like you sometimes say, I'm not going to look at the comments on posts I make because I know what I think about these things.
Yeah.
There's certain things which Ann Widdecombe knew what she thought about and wasn't going to truck any argument about them. And some of her opinions were, intolerable to other people. But as a worker, as a member of a team, as a leader of people, her private office would have done absolutely anything for her. And there was a humanity to her, which I know some of our listeners will find hard to take, given that they will disagree fundamentally with some of the things which she believed in. But as a minister and a human being, she was a very significant and important person. And I think a lot of us learned a lot from her about work ethic and sense of purpose. So yeah, it was shocking to hear she died, and then even more shocking to hear the circumstances. Yeah,
it is shocking. It's it's an interesting thing. A couple of things occurred to me there. The first one is that we do have a tendency to halo or horns people, don't we? You're either perfect or you're awful, and there's no in between. And the reality is, most people are a bit of both. And I think Ann Widdecombe's a great example of that. I loathed her views. Of course I did. They're absolute anathema to me, the things she believed, like pro-death penalty, anti-gay marriage, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you can have terrible views, but also show up as quite kind to the people in front of you, if you know what I mean. So I think it's very difficult to write people completely off. As you said, people are complex, and I'm sure there are, views that I have that people really dislike, and yet they might quite like other things about me. So I think we've got to be careful about writing people off just because they have views that we disagree with. Let's be honest, Peter, most of us have people in our families who have views we disagree with.
Yeah.
We have to get on with. So I think the best thing to do as a human being is to recognize the complexity of all human beings. So I think you're right about that. You can hate someone's views and not necessarily hate them as an individual. And but that's hard to navigate and manage, isn't it?
And she was willing to defend her arguments, and they had and opinions, and they had a consistency to them, which is infuriating if they're inconsistent with one's own opinions. But she didn't just kind of shout the same things louder and louder. She enjoyed debate, and to some extent that's what politics is about. And we can't really, we will not fall into the trap that a number of politicians are at the moment of speculating about what did or did not happen. And there are really good reasons why the police should be allowed to get on with their job. But as a symptom of the polarization and division in society that seems to be illustrated by this horrible set of circumstances, it's interesting that the Charity Commission have just brought out some research, haven't they, about how charities are being impacted by this polarized context, which we're now hearing a lot from the politicians about.
Yeah, it's something like 1 in 4 charities say that they're being directly affected by social division. And in fact, one of our trustees who works for a charity that supports refugees has had to spend additional money on security and, wearing things like that. And interestingly, that's been found quite a lot. Charities having to divert funds to additional security, cameras, etc. The Jewish community, of course, are very used to that because they've always had to extra protect. But now it seems to have seeped into this space as well. And it's just, I don't know, it's hard to get your head around what's going on, actually, because people have always disagreed on these things. We've always had people anti-immigration, people pro-immigration, people not caring one way or the other. But it's never felt so viscerally scary, I think, for individuals as it does now. And especially for charities, because, for goodness sake, they're just doing their jobs. They're doing what they're supposed to, which is helping people. You know, the fact that they're helping somebody that one set of society doesn't believe deserves help is irrelevant, you know. So,
So 4% of according to the Charity Commission, 4% of charities say they've reported incidents including vandalism or damage to their properties. 2% of those asked said their staff have been threatened in person, and we both know examples of that. And so it's interesting, and I suppose encouraging, that the public servants who are politicians, who are also experiencing these kind of personal threats and damage to property and ultimately to life, are now having an active and urgent debate about what sort of protection and support should be given to people in public life, all of which is treating the symptoms rather than the underlying cause, isn't it? But
you kind of get
there's a consistency, I think.
Yeah, you kind of get a feeling that Nigel Farage, you know, is going to use this as a gotcha moment. You know, it's like, because the £5 million that, you know, is part of the investigation into him, he says was for better security because he doesn't have very good security, and which is reason why he's got the money. And he'll now say, well, there you go, you see. Although I understand that he was offered additional security and he didn't think it was good enough, so he turned it down. So I don't know what I feel about that.
Yeah.
But it's just.
And the other dimension to it is not just the kind of physical and emotional threats, is it? But the extent to which that changes behaviour. So I think the politicians are recognising very quickly and speaking up for their right to articulate their political opinions, and how we mustn't allow polarization to suppress the cut and thrust of political debate. But it must be the case, must it not, that charities and charity leaders who are charged with advocating on behalf of causes of one kind or another, it's only human to feel a risk of speaking out and saying in an unfettered manner what it is you need to say on behalf of your cause, if there's evidence to show that the consequence could be vandalism or damage to your property or threats to your person.
But it's even worse than that, Peter, I think, which sounds weird, doesn't it? Because what could be worse than physical threats? But there's a massive threat to people's psychological safety. You know, it's not just about physical fear. It's like fear of saying something and being jumped on or ostracized, or, you know, going viral because you said something that other people don't agree with. And, you know, and it's certainly, I mean, I really, really noticed this about the trans issues that are around at the moment, is that lots and lots and lots of people who I know to be trans allies are very, very quiet on the subject because, you know, they're afraid of being jumped on, or their board have said, don't drag us into that area of sort of controversy. And that's not okay, I think.
Well,
I understand why they do it, but it's not okay that they feel forced into that position because of this army of people who are just ready to, you know.
But the same for people speaking up for women's rights and trying to articulate the law in a way which those who are advocating trans rights don't fit. I mean, that whole debate has just become toxic, so it's really difficult to express an opinion in that space at all for fear of being ostracized.
I do, of course, because, you know, I am a trans ally, and I think it's a natural part of the human condition that some people are going to have differences about them.
Well,
I understand why most people don't.
Well, I might say you're a signpost on an issue where people articulate rights-based opinions that clash with one another.
Yeah, that's true.
And some of them.
Let's not do this. Honestly, let's not, because I'm about to throw a whole load of stats and facts and statistics at you, and it won't further the conversation anymore. So, you know, so there you go. Case in point, isn't it? It's like it becomes so toxic and difficult that if we talk about our podcast, people will weigh in on one side or the other.
But there are plenty of other, I mean, those examples of people finding their charities being threatened and being threatened personally are those who, we've talked about this on the podcast before, but those who are supporting refugees and asylum seekers, and all the kind of firebombing of the hotels and this sort of stuff, and flying flags in provocative places. There's loads of examples. So I think the Charity Commission research and what the politicians are now saying to one another is kind of calling out that this toxic, aggressive polarization exists. So what do you do as a charity CEO? Do you I mean, now some of this comes with the territory, doesn't it? So how do you choose as a leader to engage with that? Do you actively become do you say what you want to say in a principled way and take the noise that goes with it, or do you pull your punches because you feel it's counterproductive? And what should trustees be doing to recognise and support not just the leaders but everyone who's associated with these sorts of issues that are attracting such violence and polarized opinion? It's a really live issue, isn't it? I think in our sector, which a few politicians have lived with it in a really kind of extreme way, but now seems to be breaking through into the kind of mainstream of something must be done, ironically, rather in the way it did when Joe Cox was murdered 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And there was a whole lot of conversation there about we need a better sort of politics where and public discourse where we are more appreciative and understanding of one another, and nothing's changed, has it really?
Yeah, it's interesting because I saw Kemi Badenoch being interviewed this morning talking about, using the right sort of language, and it's pointed out to her that she's, talked in the House about, people being stabbed in the back and that kind of thing. And they were saying, well, you said that. And I had to admit, I think she was right, that I don't think that was the problem. Saying stabbing in the back is a colloquialism, isn't it? Or an idiom that people are used to and understand what it means. However, nonetheless, she and others have been guilty of using really inflammatory language about certain sections of society and certain communities. And I think, it's very difficult for them to have credibility over these sorts of things because you hear it from all sides. The kind of language we've spoken before about Simon Lancaster's book, haven't we?
Yes.
Language, yeah.
You are not human.
That's it. You are not human. Language kills. And we know that just those people who call somebody a cockroach, like, well, don't be ridiculous. Why are you offended by that? But of course, it starts with calling people a cockroach and ends up with them not being seen as human, but being seen as pests and invaders and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's we just have to try not to use that language ourselves. I always say, when you're campaigning, try to campaign positively rather than negatively. In other words, don't attack the other side because that doesn't help anybody, but just find the positive message all the time where you can about this is what life should be like and what it could be like, and how can we help it to become that way.
And what would your advice be to a CEO or a leadership team who perhaps felt like they were inhibited in their ability to support their cause because of the impact it would have on the safety and well-being of them and their organisation?
I don't think there is advice, Peter. It is what it is, and you have to make a choice as a leader as to whether or not you can deal with the inevitable flack that's going to come with saying stuff, or whether you don't. I would always advocate courage and speaking out, because if we don't speak out for our beneficiaries, nobody else is going to. There's not somebody there waiting to take our place. On the other hand, I completely get people's fear of doing so because of, personal problems to themselves. So, there isn't a great answer. It's actually going to come down to, are there structures in place to protect you? If your staff are speaking out, have you done anything to support them in teaching them how to mute comments, for example, or how to block certain people so they don't get the pile-ons? So I think there are things like that you can do. But, if you exist to serve other people, particularly marginalised people, then I think really part of the job of being a chief exec certainly is to be courageous and be able to speak out. But, not put yourself at real physical risk.
What did you think about Lisa Nandy, the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, taking herself personally and her department off X, Twitter as was?
I'm ambivalent about these things. Because on the one hand, I don't, because if you're on Twitter, you're playing into, this control of this man, Elon Musk. On the other hand, if you're there, you give it credibility. We had this debate at DSC when we were trying to decide whether or not to stay on Twitter or come off Twitter, and it came out. What it came down to was, we don't want to add legitimacy to a platform that is unregulated. It's like the wild bloody west, isn't it, on Twitter at the moment? I mean, I was less sure. I thought, the job of charities is to go into the dark places and shine light, but my board on the whole decided they'd rather not have anything to do with it, which is totally fair enough. It was their decision. So I don't know. On the one hand, I really respect her for it. On the other hand, she's left it swampier by not being there.
Yes.
What do you think?
I don't have a board of trustees, so I can do what I like as an individual now, and I've stayed on there, and there are things which I see on there that I don't see anywhere else, and some of them are to do with this incredibly sort of distorted algorithm that tells me about things I don't really want to know about in language that I don't really appreciate, and some of it are just people I know in the world of cricket and music and that kind of thing that I still can just about see. So I've stayed there, and my instincts are that if you aren't somewhere, you don't know what's going on. So I'd rather not turn a blind eye to it and be present. But I appreciate if you're an organization, it takes time, it takes bandwidth, it takes emotional bandwidth as well. So certainly there was a period when I was at the NSPCC and we were engaged in some polarizing debates, and the social media people who were on the front line of all of this, it really was draining for them. So they were administering a process, but we were having to administer emotional support for and all of that. You make choices, don't you? You've got a limited amount of resource and places to make your argument, and maybe all of that is not as effective as making a positive case in places where you're more likely to be able to persuade people to your cause or engage with people who aren't at the moment thinking about what your cause is.
That's very true.
I would stay.
My instincts are,
as a government department, I would stay.
Yeah. My instincts are rather along those lines, to be honest. I do get it. And I just do think that our role is to shine lights in dark places and not run away from the dark places. But I absolutely understand. It's just so complex at the moment, because you can't, there's no such thing as the right decision, because one way or the other, it veers completely depending on what's going on.
Yeah, and in the absence of effective regulation, these aren't safe places. So you kind of come back to needing to,
especially for your staff
as well.
I mean, I think organisationally, so as an individual, it's okay to make that choice because you're choosing to be there. But if you choose as a department or as a charity to be there, you're relying on members of staff to be the people who deal with, who monitor it and feed it and deal with it. And so you're exposing people, not you yourself, but you're exposing, your comms people or whoever's in charge of your social media to ugliness and distressingness and, threats and things like that. And so I think that's an added complication when you're responsible for somebody else and you as an organisation decide we're staying on Twitter, somebody has to do it. So you're kind of like, yeah, exactly. So I think you do have to bear that in mind. But again, it's like, I don't know. We're living in a world where we have to protect ourselves. And as long as we're protecting ourselves, we're not serving others in the way we want. And that's just not right. So always when I'm ever not sure, rather than thinking about what keeps me safe, I think about what's going to serve this thing that I believe in. And I would tend to go down that direction. until it just got too difficult.
Yeah, which would be back to like what I was saying, I suppose, earlier about this kind of balance sheet of what is it costing you to do something, and to what end versus what are you here to achieve, and what are the actions that could most positively move you in that direction. And that's going to be more energizing personally and for your people, and that'll play out differently in different sectors, I suppose.
Yeah, it will, and things will change, Peter, inevitably. You know, I think that's the other thing to recognise, is that any decision you make now is not necessarily a decision forever. You know, often there are other routes forward, or something in the environment will change, and then you'll reappear, or, you know, Elon Musk will go bust when everybody realises his $1 trillion is on paper only and not real cash. You know, it's like, and that's the other really difficult thing at the moment, is it's so difficult for charities to make decisions because everything is changing so fast, like unbearably fast, that you just simply can't keep up. Like we spoke about this the other day, didn't we? Strategy, but
when we have our next conversation, we will have a new prime minister.
We will, yeah. Exactly.
Has the DSC already prepared its "Dear Andy Burnham, welcome to 10 Downing Street. Here are the 27 things which you need to do on day one"?
I'm tired of writing those things, Peter, or approving them or editing them. No, what we've done is analysis of what it might mean, which our brilliant colleague, our research Jay, has done. I mean, but also we don't know what it means because we don't know what he thinks, really. We know what he thinks about local issues. We've got no idea what he thinks about national and international issues. So I have a lot of sympathy with journalists who are super frustrated about the fact that he's refused to have any interviews. You know, so he starts on Monday and we won't know from day one. And then there'll be the podium speech outside number 10, where he'll make all sorts of promises that he'll be completely unable to deliver because it's not realistic. It'll be rhetoric, not reality, Peter. Listen to me being an old cynic. But you never know. You know, you live in hope that people are able to do what they set out to do.
My public affairs tip, offered here free of charge to all our listeners, is in circumstances like this, don't send a letter to the new prime minister if you want to, but he will literally get hundreds of thousands of them, and someone will read them. But more importantly, look for the people who you've worked well with, who are losers or not immediate winners at this moment in time, and write to them, because far fewer people will write to them, and they are in a psychological position where they will really appreciate an acknowledgement of what they've achieved up to this point.
Good point.
And you never know who's going to come back or where these people are going to turn up again later. They might be politicians, they might not, but if you've worked constructively with them, then that acknowledgement works really well. So that is my lesson in life from moments like this.
Brilliant advice, Peter. It really, really is. You know, I've always said you have to pay attention to the shadow as well, because, you know, at some point the shadow might be in power. Yeah, it's I remember, you know, building up a really good relationship with Nick Hurd, because he was shadow minister for about a year and a half or something like that, and we were constantly bumping into each other. And then by the time he got into government, I'd already established a relationship. I wasn't starting from scratch, whereas most of us didn't bother.
Yes.
You know? So I always think you should. I tend to think in terms of it's the whole of government. Sorry, the whole of Parliament, not just the presiding government. Is that, you know, the opposition can put motions forward, they can vote against stuff, they can persuade their mates to, you know, so yeah, you're absolutely right. But that's a lovely idea. So I hope Rachel Reeves gets loads of letters from people saying, I rather liked you and I thought you were doing well.
Well, if you had a constructive relationship with her and you thought she was doing well and you were doing if all you think about her is that she put our bloody national insurance bill up and and did nothing else for charities, you might feel differently. But you know, make your decisions who your key people are. Yeah, I guess she is likely to be one of the people who's not in the same job this time next week.
Oh, almost definitely. I'm absolutely sure there'll be a big change around. Although again, it's really frustrating when you come back to how Westminster works and why it doesn't, or Caroline Slocum's bad government. It's like the constant churning of ministers is damaging to the country, completely damaging, because they never get a chance to properly understand the issues they're facing and to see their things through. And then somebody comes along, and no minister ever comes in and just carries on doing what the previous one did, do they?
Yeah.
They always want to make their own mark. It's just such a shit way of running a government.
So again, my free advice for listeners of the podcast, and I don't suppose Andy Burnham for a minute is a listener of the podcast, is it's a good idea to keep quite a lot of people in place when you come in. A because of that continuity point, but B, each person you move is a potential enemy, because if they're going to feel either passed over or sacked.
Yeah.
And you want to keep as many of them. At the moment, he's got 322, hasn't he? Thinking that he's going to be the making of them
No,
one way or another.
349, I think it is.
Oh, has it gone up?
Yeah, it went up. Yeah, he's now definitely past the thing. Yeah, it's
it'll never be better than this for him. As soon as he starts making appointments, he'll start hacking a good number of people off, I'm sure.
Oh, 100%, absolutely 100%. And it just causes disruption for the whole of society, not just them.
Yeah.
What I can't bear is how you often hear politicians or pundits say politics is ugly. It's a dirty game. It's a cruel game. And I think, what other part of society would you say that without thinking we need to change it? Do you know what I mean? It's bizarre to me that the most important institution in the entire bloody country, our government, which can have so much impact on all of our lives, accepts the fact that politics is dirty and it's backstabbing and all the rest of it. And I'm like, I really find that odd that nobody says, well, let's see how we can make it less dirty and less ugly, and people can make better decisions.
Yeah, they do from time to time, and then nothing happens. But I didn't want to end on a cynical note. I think that was a lovely rallying cry. Let's stop there.
let's fix it.
And by the time this comes out, let's hope Somerset are at T20 finals day. England are in the World Cup final, and we are on course to a new Prime Minister and a breath of fresh air in British politics, and we'll see what it looks like when we next convene in a week's time.
Well, yes, we may well be doing our next podcast as World Cup winners and with a brand new Prime Minister, Peter. What more could you want?
Perfect. Very good.
Okay. Thanks,
come on, England.
Listeners. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.